What's up, everybody? Welcome to the podcast, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Thomas, coming to you live for another one of my impromptu Thomas Take episodes, and it is in regards to a war hero, a patriot, a political maverick, whatever you want to associate with John McCain. A man that lost his battle with brain cancer this past week. It's been a profound loss to the United States of America. This was a man that was very revered, very respected, had integrity, and in the midst of a loss, I can't remember a political candidate that handled a loss as well as John McCain did on both occasions, where he was up for the Republican nominee, and then for the actual nominee against George W. Bush, and then in the 2008 election, losing that election to Barack Obama for the presidential nominee. Handled those losses very well, and was always willing to do what it took to basically squeeze out as much potential that he believed that this country had, or has, I should say. So, I'm not the most political guy. I'd be the first to admit. I like to follow it. I find it very interesting, but I'm not making this about politics. I'm making this about a man that I had respect for. I have respect for John McCain. I'll always have respect for John McCain. I see this man as a hero to many, many people, not just in the United States, but abroad in other countries. He did whatever he could to not just help the United States, but to help the world. And there's a lot to be, appreciative of that. We have politicians now that, and I'm obviously, we point to the president, the current sitting president right now, President Donald J. Trump. I've made, statements in regards to my support for the president, but I support the United States. I want this country to be as prosperous as I think it can be, and there's a long way to go within that, social issues and everything of that nature, that I feel like sometimes this current president kind of just lets fall by the wayside. And I think a lot of people, the majority of people that listen to this podcast, would agree with that. But, as I said, I don't want to make this political. And the opinion of, I will say this, the opinion of Donald Trump in regards to John McCain is one of the most disturbing quotations that you can take from a Trump campaign, from his presidential campaign. He referred to him as not a war hero. He referred to him as someone that, he prefers soldiers that don't get captured, that prisoners of war are not heroes. And I am just still perplexed at that. Although I ultimately voted for him in November of 2016, that comment will always kind of linger over my head as something that I'm dumbfounded by it. But I want to talk about John McCain's impact, not just in the political realm, but in the sports realm. Not many people have really touched on this quite yet, and I think that I would be really remiss to not bring it up, and it's something that I have great knowledge of, being that I followed this instance so closely throughout my life and following the sport of mixed martial arts. There are a few figures that have really gone unnoticed in terms of the growth of mixed martial arts. Figures like Dana White, figures like Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, and then there's some big name fighters, guys like Matt Hughes, Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, and then the obviously what I refer to as the athletic generation with guys like Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, but a man that had just as much to do with the reform of mixed martial arts. He had everything to do with the reform of mixed martial arts, was John McCain. It was John McCain that specifically said that it could not be legalized back in the early 90s due to the fact that he thought of it as human cockfighting, which in a lot of ways the sport of mixed martial arts was. Guys not fighting in weight divisions, no round time limits, no rounds, period. Anything went, eye gouging, groin shots, whatever you want to call it. Shots to the pills, whatever you want to call it. Everything went in those days of the UFC when John McCain made those statements. It took everybody off guard to refer to it as human cockfighting. And it was a statement that allowed the UFC to really embrace some change and to create a better, more reformed combat sports league. And without that, without John McCain making an impact in that realm, I don't think the UFC is what it is today. Furthermore, the sport of mixed martial arts is not what it is today. Oftentimes, the distinction of, you're into UFC, people sometimes think the acronym UFC is mixed martial arts, but the UFC is a league inside of mixed martial arts. Just like we don't call football NFL, we call football, and we call the NFL the NFL. Same distinction. We don't call baseball MLB, we call baseball, and Major League Baseball a league within baseball. So you get the point, and those three letters, UFC, I don't think would be as popular as they are now without a guy like John McCain. And really, you really think of it, most politicians would have just scoffed their nose at the idea of the UFC. And John McCain actually had the due diligence and wherewithal to pretty much dive into it and say, well, this has potential, but these things got to be done first before we go any further with making this sport legal in the majority of the states in the country at that time. The UFC, mixed martial arts, was not legal. So that's something that I can honestly say John McCain made a choice that essentially affected my life drastically. Had he not been so outspoken, had he not said the term human cockfighting, had it not really, without it coming from John McCain, if it was coming from anybody else, I don't think it would have been heard as much. Whereas a guy as revered and as respected and as profound a voice as John McCain's was in the Senate, I don't think we would have seen the change right out of the gate. It took some time, not going to say it didn't, but John McCain made a choice to comment on something that he really could have just brushed under the rug, but instead he went out and made a difference for a sport that really, nobody was really talking about. He was the guy that really was the first one to make a statement on it. So it wasn't just legislation to sign a bill to pass, health, thumbing down the health care. It wasn't just John McCain saying thumbs down to repealing Obamacare. There were a lot of things that had to do with outside of the political realm, whether it's health care, whether it's Social Security, whatever it was that he tried to tackle during his tenure. He tackled things outside of that. He tackled something in the sports realm that not many people had the guts to tackle. And, oddly enough, the two men that were really in the forefront of making mixed martial arts accepted were John McCain with his words saying that, that this was human cockfighting, and Donald Trump by hosting events once it was reformed at the Trump Taj Mahal. That is why Dana White, the UFC president, is so indebted to Donald Trump, because Trump was really the first guy to give them their first venue that had credibility. So very interesting. And going back and watching that meeting where McCain said that it was human cockfighting, I found that to be very interesting, and you really look at what he did to make the sport better. Worked with guys like John Jones to pass things in New Mexico and things like that. This guy was deservedly so highly rated, highly respected by his constituents, whether it was a Democrat, whether it was a Republican, and he's going to be greatly missed in a time where political party seems to mean everything. A guy like John McCain's policies and credo, if you will, his code was that he was going to do whatever it takes to make America a better place, whether that was agreeing with a Democrat or disagreeing with a Republican. That didn't really matter. And I really have become fascinated by his story within the last few years. And obviously, he was somebody that I followed closely in the '08 election. But when I had first heard about his stance against MMA, I thought, this guy, what is he talking about? And then I did more research and found out that he was an integral part in bringing MMA back to the reformed state that it is in now, where there are rounds, there are weight classes. This is deemed a sport, and he has a great respect. He had a great respect for the sport, and he did his due diligence working with athletes inside the UFC. So John McCain had a legacy, not just in politics, but he had a legacy in sports as well. And I know the state of Arizona will miss him greatly. He did a lot for the state of Arizona, and most importantly, he did a lot for the world. So John McCain, a few words there from the Thomas Take Sports podcast in terms of John McCain's legacy in sports, one that most people do not know about. Take care, everybody. God bless America.